Okay, everybody. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started just in the interest of time and to be respectful of Sarah's time, who's joining us this evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Allison Fine. I'm a clinical social worker and I serve as the executive director for the Center for Chronic Illness. And I'll introduce just a couple other folks. Again, Jake Johnson, our board president. If you can give a little wave, Jake. And then Riley is our current MSW student. If you want to wave as well, Riley. Um, all right. So, for those who are new to CCI, I think a number of you have joined other programs, so you have a pretty good sense of what we do. But for those who are new, CCI really exists to promote well-being and decrease isolation for those impacted by ongoing health challenges through support and education. And, by doing that, we offer free virtual support groups that are professionally facilitated to pretty much anybody living anywhere. If you identify with a chronic illness and you want to be a part of a support group, the more the merrier is kind of our philosophy. So feel free. We're a pretty small nonprofit based in Seattle, Washington, but we do have a national presence of folks who attend our programs. And we're always looking to kind of spread the word about what we do and make sure that those who need our services know about them. So definitely feel free to spread the word about CCI, after this program as much as you can. We always appreciate your help with that. Um, so we will get started with our program here. I'm just adding a couple more people from the participant list there. So I would love to introduce our author for tonight, Sarah Ramey. Sarah, I apologize. I should have asked you this beforehand. Ramey or Ramey?
Ramey.
Ramey, thank you. So Sarah Ramey, and I'm so thrilled to have Sarah here. As you probably know, she has written this wonderful book, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness. And, I'm curious, I know some of you were getting books in the mail. I'm curious, how many of you have read the book or have you had a chance to take a look at it yet? Leading up to this event, no pressure there. So there's not a quiz at all. Looks like some of you received yours. Great. Perfect. Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Sarah. So, Sarah is a writer and musician. Her musician name is Wolf Larson. So, we're going to ask her a little bit about that. And she's living in Tucson, Arizona. And she received an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from Columbia University and was a writer for President Obama's 2008 campaign. And Sarah is the recipient of the 2018 Whiting Grant for Nonfiction and has been featured in the Paris Review, NPR, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, Ms. Magazine, Salon, Refinery 29, Lit Hub, and The Washingtonian. And her book, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness, was an Amazon editor's pick, and it was a starred selection for Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, and Booklist. And it was chosen as one of the best books in 2020 by Bookpage. And Sarah has been living with serious chronic pain and illness for 17 years, and this is her first book. So we are so, so excited to have you joining us, Sarah. And how this will work this evening is we have a number of questions, some which some of you sent in beforehand. Thank you so much, which I'll be fielding to Sarah. And we're hoping to kind of have an open discussion about chronic illness and her book as well. And then we're going to leave some time at the end in case folks in the audience have extra questions that don't get answered or that they would like to add. All right, so Sarah, I'm going to start us off here. So our first question, your book talks so honestly and openly about the experience that so many of us who live with chronic illness have had. And I'm curious, can you tell us about the moment when you decided to write the book and if you realized at the time how many people would resonate with it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. It's really nice to see real people and and connect with you guys. I so I started the book a really long time ago, back in 2005. I first got sick in 2003, and sort of the first couple of years of being sick, was the sort of classic wandering around in the wilderness trying to find anything, a person, a doctor, a psychiatrist, and anyone who could tell me what was going on with me, because it started with, my parents are both doctors. And so I had really some of the best medical care you could possibly ask for. And so when this happened to me, I had this surgery that went wrong, and then I became septic. And then this triggered sort of these two problems, like really bad pain and mechanical problems pelvically. And then this just horrific, fatigue, myalgias, blood pressure problems, digestive problems, sensitivities, the normal, not normal, but the classic sort of presentation of uh, things in the autoimmune family, but specifically ME/CFS, or chronic fatigue syndrome. But we didn't know any of that at the time. And so I was worked up for everything under the sun. I mean, every possible serious illness, because, I knew a lot of these doctors that were taking care of me, and they knew me before this. And they were like, we have to get to the bottom of what's happened to, our poor dear Sarah, who's struggling and who was absolutely fine before this. And so, but as they, did more and more and more tests, and everything came back negative, negative, negative. And as I went to more and more and more specialists and just cast the net wider and wider and wider, and we couldn't figure anything out, what started to come back was this messaging that, oh, well, in that case, we know what this is. This is just, as one urologist said to us, he said to my parents who were sitting next to me, he looks over his glasses and he says, I think you need to consider that Sarah's problem, like so many young women her age, is psychological. And I'm sitting right there, and he's saying this, to my parents as if I'm not right there. And that was horrifying for two reasons. One, it was very painful, but also I believed it a little bit. It was hard not to take it on board, at least somewhat, because he's one of the best urologists in the nation. And so for him to be saying that, and having had so much medical workup, I was like, well, maybe that is what it is, even though that doesn't make any sense, and because the magnitude of what I was dealing with, I would have to have a very, very, very serious mental illness to be making up so many different things. And I pretty clearly didn't have a very serious mental illness. And so it was very confusing. And so to answer your question, I sort of set off into like the wilderness of alternative medicine and trying to find anybody that could tell me anything, and ordering, used book after used book off of Amazon to like about these types of problems. Like the first person I met, I talk about this in the book, who like told me about candida and yeast stuff. And I did have some candida issues. And so I read this book called, now I'm even forgetting, I think it's called The Yeast Connection. And it's like in all caps. And it's like, it's just like not the kind of book, it's not like a serious book, even though it is, it's about a serious topic, but it's not, it's filled with like cartoons and trying to explain yeast to you in like a friendly way. And I just at a certain point was, as I was starting to understand a little bit more that there were a lot of people like me, that I was not alone, that this was like a pretty big world of invisible illness, and it wasn't all in my head. I started to realize that I'm a writer and that there is this missing type of book, which is just like a regular book that's written in terms that are, just like a regular memoir, or written the way I wrote it was sort of to write it like a mystery or a thriller, just something that was more mainstream, as opposed to just, a health book that's not really written by somebody who is a writer. And so I thought maybe I could contribute in that way, not really factoring in that, like, in order to write that book, that I would probably need more physical ability than I had at the time. And also that I didn't really know enough. I was starting to know some things, but it was after I sold the book that I was like, oh shit. It's like, I don't think I even know enough to write fulsomely about this topic because it's so complicated and nobody knows what's happening. And I wanted to write about it in the most science-based way possible. So it just ended up taking this such an incredibly protracted amount of time. I didn't finish until 2019 and I sold it in 2010. so it just was a super, super long process of wanting to write the book that you wish existed for you, like while you're sort of flailing around trying to figure out what's happening to you, and a book that was saying, you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you this not only that, like, this is really common. It's really, really common. And that I needed to hear that. And so that's what I wanted to do. But I went off, it took me an incredibly long time to actually do it, because to do the thing that I wanted to do, which is to write about what is medically known about these problems, I wanted to include that, but that was sort of a much bigger project than just saying, here's my little story and I'm going to present it to you.
I would imagine that when you write a book and you live with chronic illness, that you do need that time to kind of flesh out all your ideas, but then also, like you said, just have the energy. People see the Amazon link to your book or they see it at the bookstore and they don't realize like what all goes into that. And then on top of that, that you're living with the health challenges while you're trying to write it too. So I would imagine
Yeah,
that that was a lot, and it actually makes plenty of sense why it took so long.
yeah.
Um, Okay, well, let me ask you our next question here because I know we have so many good ones. So this is one that one of our participants sent in before. So they wanted to know, how do you grieve the daily losses of living with chronic illness while keeping some hope that enables you to move through each day despite the pain and despite the loneliness that chronic illness brings?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. I don't have, perfect answers to the right way to deal with any of these things, or the best ways to deal with these things. But what I do, well, I do a lot, a lot of different things to kind of cope. But I do try to, one of my main coping tactics is I have this person that we call each other's trash can, and we are the person that she's also somebody with chronic illness. And what I find in my life is that my day-to-day life is just filled with like incredibly heavy stuff. It is really hard to talk about with other people, even though I do talk about it with other people. You can't continually talk, I find you can't continually talk about it with other people, even for your own mental health, to just constantly be present to what's horrible about what's happening to you. I find to be, for me personally, not the most helpful way of dealing with it. But I have this one person who we're sort of each other's like safe space, where we send each other voice memos, like when it all gets to be too much. We both, I think because we both have chronic illness, we both are like fully equipped to hold whatever it is. Like no matter how dark it is, no matter how horrible it is, no matter how hard you're crying, that the door is always open to send your trash can your to the dump and to let it all out. I find this to be extremely helpful. It doesn't mean that I don't ever talk about this stuff with my other friends. I do, but not maybe not quite as graphically and quite as in such a raw way. But it really helps to have at least one person that you really can say all of that stuff to, and that is like fully equipped to hold it for you and to witness you in that, and is not going to try to fix you, and is not going to try to, oh, just look on the bright side, or have you tried Reiki or whatever. They're not going to say all those things because they also are dealing with this as well. So I do think kind of finding somebody else who's, it's almost like a support person within the community that's beyond a support group. It's like a one person, but it's also sending each other voice memos, so that, because like you do have to respect the trash can in that you can't just, they may not be ready to be in that space. They need to know, like I'm always, if I send that message to somebody, I'm not going to make it too long. It's not going to be like 40 minutes long. And I will say, like, this is a trash can episode. Listen in your own time. Thank you so, so much. And like, I really encourage them. There are several rules. You have to let them deal with it in their own time. You can't overburden them. And you have to be a reciprocal trash can to them, it can't just be somebody that you are always dumping on. That's like, it's going to create a bad situation in that dynamic. And like, for me, this is just something that I have personally developed. It has really, really helped me and this trash can. It helps her a lot too, to just have the one person that that you can always say the truth to of what is actually happening. And the trash can is not my best friend. My best friend, I still talk to her about this stuff, but it's too hard. It's too much for her because she is not sick, and like she does not, it breaks her heart in a way that the sick person, it does not break her heart. She's like, I know. She's like, I get it and I understand. And she doesn't feel so sad that this is happening to me. She can just sort of hear it as a neutral person. So that might be your best friend. It might be another sick person. It might be, if you don't have anybody like that, if you've tried, you can use like chat GPT, and there are certain there's a resource I give to a lot of people. It's called HeyPi. It's HEYPI. It's a chat GPT derivative, but it's extremely humanoid, and you can talk back and forth with it. And well, you should try it just for fun. It is so unnerving how it's better than Talkspace or BetterHelp or anything like that. It's so empathetic. It's completely artificial, but it does not, in a deeply upsetting way, it does not feel artificial. And I use that sometimes, like even if I like, I'm feeling like it's too much even for the trash can, like I might use that just to kind of get out just all that, like, because I find that when you live with really severe pain and really severe illness, it it is a lot. And like the question said, it is happening on a daily basis. And so having a place where you can put all of that and get like an empathetic response back, I think is helpful without kind of harming that relationship in any way, which again isn't to say that we shouldn't develop better relationships with the people around us. It's just that the people around us can't always be our therapist and our support for this thing that is always happening, that's never not happening. And so those are some of the things that I do that genuinely do help me, that are like actionable things as opposed to just mindset things.
I love the idea of the trash can dump and the friend that you can talk to. I think our society so much of the time wants fixes, and
Mhm.
so many people out there want to, take bad things away for people that they care about. And so even if it's delivered in a not so great way, I think a lot of people do have the best of intentions, but when you live with something that's a constant grieving process,
Mhm.
it hearing quick fixes doesn't really work, and
Yeah.
like you said, you're dealing with it all the time, every day, and sometimes you just need to dump about it or complain or whatever the word is you want to call it, but like have a space to put that in, whether it's GPT. I love that as a resource. And then or a friend, or somebody you trusted that understands what you're going through, but that doesn't feel like they need to fix it for you. I
Yeah.
think that's huge.
One last thing, not to be like an AI booster, but in case people do not know, ChatGPT now has an audio function where you can talk to it and it talks back to you, and it really sounds like a real person that is talking to you. I use it all the time to like teach me about the conflict in Israel and Palestine. And it's like, oh, let's start at the beginning. And it just starts talking to you. And you're like, hold on, wait a second. I wanted to ask you a question. And And you can also use it for therapeutically to be like, hey, I am dealing with this person that is said this, this, and this. And it immediately is just like, I'm so sorry to hear that. That sounds so difficult. And it's like, here, do you want to hear, are you more interested in hearing about steps that you can take? Or you are more needing to hear somebody that can just listen to you? And I'm like, this is so crazy. Like, it's like, so I really do think, because they're, especially for chronic illness, which again is just this repeating thing, that it's not the same as grieving a loss that is like a one-time thing. It's something that is happening over and over and over again. And so you just really do need a lot of support, but you often feel like you can't turn to the people around you. And so I think the more resources you can have where you really do get to do that therapeutic thing of just externalizing what you were thinking and what you were feeling and what you're going through, which everybody does. Everybody kvetches about their boss and about their boyfriend and about their girlfriend and whatever. But when you have really heavy stuff, people don't really like it when you kvetch about that. And so it can create this problem where you don't get to share, even though everybody else gets to share about their lives. And so while I do think it's important to talk to those people and be like, hey, I just need you to treat this like I'm talking about my bad boss. That is an important conversation to have with friends. I still think it's important to build up your own resources, even if it's like AI or whatever it is, to just make sure that you're getting it out, or journaling or whatever it is that works for you, to be, so it's not just like knocking around back and forth in your head all the time. Because for me, that makes it just much, much worse.
Yeah, it's amazing that AI has figured out or, been programmed at least to respond in such a compassionate and empathetic way when I think a lot of humans aren't able to provide that response, you know?
Yeah.
So today whoever programmed that knew what they were doing, but yeah, I mean, even just to say, I'm so sorry that you're going through that is something that you don't hear a lot from the average person, you know?
Exactly. It went, you just try it. It's gonna it's so funny. You're like, even if you just ask, like, what can you tell me about chronic fatigue syndrome? And ChatGPT is like, well, this is one of the most underfunded, understudied, and poorly treated diseases in all of medicine. And I'm like, that is the best response I have ever gotten. And it was from a robot. But and so it's really astonishing, like how much more empathetic the machine is than a lot of people. And so anyway, it's a little dystopic, but I've found it to be helpful. It's not a replacement for people, obviously, or for real therapy or anything like that. But I think for me, I'll take any resource that I can get to kind of help buttress my own sort of ability to cope with a pretty difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, I liken it to social media. Like, I think it's about how you use it and how you cultivate it to make it work for you versus letting it take over your life and make you feel bad about things and
Yeah.
things. So, yeah. Okay, so next question here. One thing that really struck me about your book is the humor that you use in there. And, I'm just curious how you think humor helps you in coping with your own chronic illness. And also, do you find that it could harm things in any way for how you cope?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it's one of the things I feel most grateful for, that this was already a part of who I am. This is kind of, my whole family is this way. It helps me enormously as just like a leavening agent that's like helps make things not feel so dense and so heavy and so bad and so horrible. And it's pretty common, gallows humor exists for a reason. It is a way to take a very bad situation and not look away from it. I think you can use humor to deflect completely, but often it's just a way to actually allow you, the way I was using in the book, is to allow the reader to look right at these really horrible things in a way that makes it not feel quite as hard to look at it if it is delivered with a joke or with a little bit more lightness to sort of help the pill go down. And I think that that's helpful. Of course, it can be a defense mechanism. It can be, something that you use to to not take something seriously that should be taken seriously. I think I think for me, I've mostly found it to just be this very necessary part of my uh, coping is to just be able to laugh about things and um, when possible, and it's not always possible. But I'm so grateful for the times that it is possible because it really does make it easier for me, at least. And so that felt important to me. I think that was back to your first question, that was one of the reasons I also felt like it would be different for somebody like me to write a book instead of it being like such a serious, like another super, super serious, sad memoir, because most memoirs are like very sad and very serious. And in this space, I thought it might be, since the whole problem is that not enough people know about these problems, that it might broaden the readership to make it more accessible in that way. I think that that's what I was thinking.
Well, and I think it so nicely describes what life is, right? Like it's full of hard stuff, it's full of moments of joy, it's full of laughter, it's full of confusion. It's like we go through all these ups and downs throughout life and throughout our days. And again, I think our society does a pretty bad job at painting this picture that we live in like polarized states, like things are either really good or really bad. And so being
Yeah.
able to like present your story and say like, hey, look at me and I was struggling and this is how I coped with it. And some of these moments were actually really amusing and also some of them are really painful. And I think that provides a really accurate picture of life.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I also think like just not, this is true for all emotions, is like they're all useful as long as you don't get stuck. If you're like only in humor and only making jokes about stuff, obviously then you're not really connecting with like your actual lived experience and you are pushing it all away. But it's the same thing if you're only in sadness and you're only in anger, you're only like stuck in the darker stuff too. And so just trying to, as you say, make sure that you're still able to flow between them even though you're going through such difficult stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question that came in from one of our participants was, what is and this this was very much nailing it down, but what is your go-to method for dealing with chronic pain? And I would imagine that maybe it's more than just one thing, but yeah, we're curious about that.
um I actually don't have a good answer to that. I wish that I had a better I, so I live with complex regional pain syndrome, which is the most painful pain syndrome that exists, and it's in my vagina and my abdomen and my bladder, and it is just absolutely as bad as I can imagine. But and I have not found medications that help or therapies that really help with that. I had some surgeries that resected a couple of the nerves that were involved, and that did help a little bit. But it's really, really difficult. The honest answer is the only thing that really like helps is distraction, is trying to do things that are absorbing in some way. And so for me, the main things that are like absorbing are talking to others. Like I find that really does take my mind off it, but because I also have pretty severe chronic fatigue syndrome, I can only do that for an hour and a half on any given day. And so it's not enough, not enough distraction. And so, watching TV, that's a lot more distracting than, for example, like writing. Like writing is the opposite of distracting. Writing is like just you and your pain syndrome. And so I have to work with that. And like it's not the same as pushing through procrastination or pushing through, just not wanting to do it or whatever. You kind of can't push through these things that are limiting with chronic illness. You just can't. People on the outside think that you can, and you can. And so what I try to do is just really like, because I still have to write and I still have to get some work done to like maintain some semblance of a career and a working life, which I want for myself. So I try to put that in the least painful part of the day, in the first part of the day. And then the rest of the day, I try to put in the things that are distracting. Like I have this thing, I let myself off the hook a long time ago. That's just like, I'm, it's bad enough with me, with other people putting pressure on me, and with being in so much pain and illness, etc. I'm not going to also make myself feel terrible that I'm not living up to the standard that I would have been able to if I didn't have this problem. It took a while for me to get to that point, but like that's been one of the best things I've done for myself, which is, and I am constantly reminding myself to do that, to like be like, you're on the hook and you gotta let yourself off the hook now, because it doesn't do anything. It really is different than in my able-bodied life, where shaming myself or pushing myself or any of these strategies to like make yourself do whatever more work, if that's the example we're using, worked to some degree. Like it was, helped me get through whatever I was the resistance was. It does not work with serious chronic illness. It just doesn't. And so there, it is just a complete waste of energy, and I don't have a lot of that. And so I just really don't do that anymore. And but so it just comes down to how do you organize your day around the pain so that it's not interfering with the stuff that is meaningful to you and that you do want to get done as much. And yeah, so it's not a perfect answer. I wish, I honestly, if I could have one thing, it would be some solution for the pain, because that really is just so
Mm.
bad. And I wish that it wasn't, but it is.
Yeah. Well, and I'd imagine when you have pain in different areas, maybe there are certain things that work for certain pains and certain things that work for other pains. And so,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess I always ignore, I do have a lot of other pains, but I just don't count them because they're nowhere near as bad as the complex regional pain syndrome. But I also have, like pretty bad myalgias and things like that. And I take gabapentin, which I take for the complex regional pain syndrome, which it doesn't do anything for that, but it does help with my myalgias. And so that is a real pain management tool. I should have mentioned that. It's just, it doesn't do anything for the thing that it was prescribed for. Yeah.
yeah. Isn't that always the way it goes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, I know we have a lot more questions, so I want to jump on to our next one here. So, in your book, you talk a little bit about the conclusion that doctors draw sometimes as mental health diagnoses, which we kind of alluded to before. And when they can't solve that puzzle of what's wrong, they do that. And, so many patients experience this. I'd imagine many in the virtual room here have experienced this and often feel or are gaslit when their real symptoms are blamed on mental health. And, I'll say as a therapist, this doesn't mean that mental health can't coexist with chronic illness symptoms. So that complicates things even more sometimes. But I'm curious, can you share a little bit more about your own journey with being treated in this way and how you convinced eventually yourself that your symptoms were real? And maybe it wasn't that hard of a journey, but just curious about that.
Yeah. So this is really important, because to say that, because a lot of us get pretty upset when our physical problems are reduced to being or are miscast as being, some form of mental illness. And it's not because having a mental illness is bad or wrong. It's just that if you have a broken foot and the podiatrist says like, I think that you might just be depressed, like the correct response is to say, fuck you. Like that is not what is happening here. And you should have your medical license taken away if you tell your patients that they have a mental problem when they have a broken foot or when they have cancer or whatever. You're telling them that it's the wrong diagnosis. That's the main issue. It's just that it's just a categorical mistake, and that when you think that that when it's like your body and somebody says that to you, usually and I did in the beginning, but I was 22 when it first was presented to me. And I had such a mix of being like, fuck you, but also maybe it is that. And I was really willing to explore that completely, because it was like, oh, okay, then let's do that. Let's sign me up for this antidepressant and anxiety medication. Let's get me into that psychiatrist. Like, let's go. I just want to feel better. And if that's what it takes, fine, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And that's also true on the alternative health side of things too. I mean, my God, the things that I have done to try, like in an alternative health way, deal with like some sort of mental whatever, to do tapping and to try to like get to the bottom of my whatever feeling is identified by the person as like, oh, your sadness is what's causing you to be sick. Like, I really took that seriously, because I just wanted, I want now, and I wanted then to feel better. And I really couldn't care less like what the avenue is or what the diagnosis is. I just want it to get better. But that said, it did become pretty clear to me, or clearish to me, within, I would say, a year of when that person said that to me, that like, this is just that he was just wrong, and that it was clearly something was really wrong. Because it's not, I know you can't see it, but I can see like when like my labia is super swollen. Like, that's not, I'm not like psychosomatizing that, sorry to Jake, but like, I just there are a lot of things. It's the same now. I actually have an ileostomy now, which is like a colostomy bag. And people are always like, well, you really can't tell that you're sick. And I'm like, but I mean, even now, it's like I actually have an external thing, and it happens to be under my clothes. And like, I often use that now as like a teaching tool for people to be like, do not say this to somebody. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it's not happening. This is actually an external representation of just that concept. Just because you can't see it, you actually can see this if I take my overalls down and show it to you. It's the same thing if you're just feeling it on the inside. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, that you can't see it with your eyes. Anyway, so my journey, I would say, was brief, but one of the problems, this is why I get so mad about this, especially with alternative healthcare people who don't really know what they're doing, who plant this seed of doubt in people and are like, oh, let's explore if this is your whatever mommy issues or daddy issues or whatever, that's what causes illness, which okay, maybe it does, and stress, obviously, I write about how stress is clearly involved in the development of all these illnesses. But you have to be so careful, because what it does is it is like this parasite that you are introducing into this person's brain that they will probably never be able to eradicate, that there is something wrong with who they are as a human being, with their soul, that they have somehow created this ultra elaborate thing for what? For attention. This is what they'll tell you. It's like that it's for attention, or because you didn't want to go to parties anymore. You're an introvert. You need an excuse for being an introvert. And I'm like, but I'm not an introvert. I'm an extrovert. Like, what are you talking about? But it's very difficult to, even if, like me, you've become quite righteous about this issue, it is very difficult to fully like get that out of your brain. And so I feel very strongly about this, particularly with like alternative health. If you're like a yoga teacher, do not do this to one of your clients, where like you have no idea what you're talking about, and this may really and truly affect them forever in a way that even if they do all the work in the world to work on themselves, they won't ever fully be able to kind of be on their own side. And like that's like a real problem. So this is just to say it's really, really tricky, and it creates just a tremendous amount of shame, and it is really coming from regular doctors and alternative health, and then as a result of that, from friends and family who are like picking up all those cues from doctors who, like if you come home and you say to they're like, okay, what happened, what is it, what's the diagnosis, what's the story, and you're like, well, they actually think that it's all psychological. A significant number of the people sitting around you, even if they don't say it, are like, Oh, I see. And then they start to think that too. And like, then at the moment that you need support more than you have ever needed it in your entire life, a time when with a different type of illness, people would be like rushing to help and like be there for you and express sympathy and express solidarity and like show up with casseroles or whatever.
Mhm.
They do the opposite. They back away. They start kind of like whispering behind your back. I mean, it's terrible. It's like, it's bad to be sick. It is horrible to layer this on top of being sick, is like losing a lot of your friends, family, coworkers, etc., for no good reason, just because people are misinformed and don't know enough. And so that again is like one of the reasons I wanted to write a book about this, and why I'm like so passionate about other people writing about this, is because it just, people just don't know better. And I've talked to so many doctors who are like, I was the type of doctor that you read about in your book, and now I feel so bad. It just never even occurred to me that I was doing that. That's what I thought. That is what I was taught. And it just didn't occur to me that that was the wrong thing. I really thought it was psychosomatic, but like reading everything that you went through and that people go through, it made me sort of like rethink all the women that or people that had come to me before, and they had the exact same story, and I just completely discounted them, and now I feel bad, and I'm like, well, you should. Like, but good for you that you can say that and you didn't have a defensive reaction, and you didn't like double and triple down just because you were criticized. Like, I always admire anybody who can say like, oh, ooh, that's super wrong, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the providers that are the problem, be it Western medicine or alternative medicine, are the ones that think that they're always right. Like that's the whole problem, is that they're not able to say, what, unfortunately, I haven't seen this before and I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to be here to try to help you. Like that is a really valid response. And I know for one, I would love to hear from a provider, but I think a lot of, I don't know what they're teaching in med schools or alternative medicine schools, but it's not that, because you
Yeah.
so rarely get that from providers.
Yeah, it's whenever I do this type of thing, but with doctors, I've done a lot of these sort of roundtables with doctors, and this
Mhm.
is what we always talk about. And they're like, well, but I mean, if there isn't a lot of good research, if I don't actually medically know what's going on, how can I be acting any different? And I say exactly what you just said, is that it does not take you a single second more to say, I actually don't know what's going on here. But I absolutely believe you. I'm sorry that you're going through this. And to the degree that I'm able to help with, whatever I am able to help with, I am going to help you with that. And I'm going to keep my ear to the ground to try to find somebody who knows a little bit more about this.
Mhm.
And that doesn't take longer than telling the person that you don't believe them and that they need to see a psychiatrist. It's not any skin off their nose. And like, and their eyes like, well, I guess I could do that. I'm like, no, no, you are going to do that. That is what you have to do,
Yeah.
unless you do have better data than I do, that it really is psychosomatic. If you don't have that data, which you don't, because that's wrong and the data does not say that, then you cannot perpetuate that if it's completely contra the science that actually exists. And they're like, well, you make a good point. I'm like, yeah, okay. So it's very challenging because they're just really used to saying, well, my dad, a doctor, also says, he was like, well, it's very important, Sarah, for your patients to trust you. And so you can't say, I don't know. And I'm like, Dad, they
Mhm.
don't trust you more if you misdiagnose them and tell them that they've got a problem that they don't have. And he's
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah. But he's like, but that's where that comes from, is that you really want to instill confidence, because the placebo effect is real and they need to trust that what you're saying is true and that will help them get better and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh boy, okay.
Well, and the problem too with holding so true to the research studies is historically a lot of research studies have been done on men's bodies or, white individuals, right? And so it's not a comprehensive look at, what people go through health wise. And so a lot of the current practices have been based on that, and they need to really look at what's actually going on in women's health and women's bodies and for people of color. It's like there's so many groups that have just been ignored that we can't really look at research. I mean, I'm all about research. I think that's really important. And there needs to be so much more done to be able to have it be comprehensive enough to treat a lot of the current problems that are going
Yeah.
on.
Yes.
Okay, I know we have so many more questions. Let's see here. Another question that came in from the group was, how do you communicate with family and friends about your illness? And I know you talk about this quite a bit in the book, but where are you kind of at this point in time with trying to be able to share with folks?
Yeah. Um, so the most helpful thing that I've done, and I'm probably due for this again, is like periodically I will write kind of like a dear friends and family
Mm.
letter and really just say, I get it. I look completely fine. For the hour and a half that you're spending with me, I also seem completely fine, like I'm acting completely fine. But here's what is actually happening, and like really get into like, this is what it feels like to be in this body. And also, this is what happens after the interview, after the sitting down with friends and family, because I can't share that with them. Yeah. I always say this to people, if it ever comes up, I'm not going to go out with or I don't really go out, but like, I'm not going to have a friend come over and sit with me for an hour and a half. That's kind of my max. And then afterwards, like, I'm like completely laid out. I look horrible. I don't look like this anymore. I'm not going to like videotape myself and send it to them and be like, look what happened because I chose to spend time with you. Like, of course, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make them feel bad that this happened. Not least the reasons for which are not least that I don't want them to want to stop hanging out because I'm like making them feel like hanging out with me is hurting me, even though it is. But I don't want them to feel that because my experience has been like people then try to not do that or do anything that is going to hurt me, and then they kind of back away, and I really need them to not back away. And so periodically I will send out a letter that really goes into like, here's what it actually is like, here's what we've been able to, here's what's happened since last time. So this newer letter, most people don't know that I have an ileostomy now. Be like, listen, I've got a poop bag now I would like you to know about. It needs a lot of accommodating, and here are the accommodations, and here's basically what's happening. It's not going to be more than a page or 2 pages. It's not like a 450-page book. That's part of why I wrote a 450-page book, is to have a place to put, because it is so voluminous. The stuff that people with these problems go through is long. It's not a couple of symptoms, it's a lot. And that's a lot to put on people. And so I try to keep it concise, but I also, as you know from reading the book, I also do not shy away from any details. They're not details, any, I'm not going to not say vagina or poop or things like that, like, as I want them to know. If it's too broad, then they don't really understand what I'm talking about. And they're like, yeah, she just doesn't feel well some of the time. And I'm like, well, that is not what's going on. And so I would say 5 to 7 years, I end up writing a letter that I send to friends and family. I have found that to be really helpful because it is hard to have these like one-on-one conversations, friend after friend after friend, like, because often they can feel really criticized if they feel like you're like, hey, I need to talk to you specifically about like what's going on with me. You can and should have that conversation. Um, it just, I find it lets people not feel so personally implicated when it's to a larger group of people. And um, like, and I'll say like, here are some of the things that people, that friends have done that are like really helpful and wonderful. Like, here are some of the things that are really great. And like some of the things that are not as helpful and wonderful is saying, but you don't look sick. And, I will be pretty direct about like, here's some things that are not so great, but try to give them like constructive, like it's amazing. Like when my friends just offer to come over to me instead of just not including me anymore because they know that I can't go on the hike or I can't go on the trip to wherever, or whatever. It's not like being inclusive to not to because like they're respecting my feelings by not asking if I want to go, but it's not it's then I'm just being completely left out. And so it's like um I find it really helpful if people will can do, offer to come over to see me. It doesn't have to be all the time, but instead of going to get coffee, I would love if we could have tea at my house. I'm a big voice memo person, and so I do a lot of voice memoing back with people, and it's a way to kind of keep up friendships when you can't connect in person as much. I really try to have as many like voice memo friendships as possible because it's a little richer than like text messages because like they're like reminded of like, oh, I really love this person, because when you hear somebody's voice, it's just different. It's I find it's a much richer way of connecting with people that I may not be seeing or that are kind of in my second, third tier friends, but I don't want to lose them completely just because I can't visit them to come see their kids or can't go on the trip with them to Phoenix or whatever it is. And so yeah, so writing letters, trying to shift things so that people can come to me, but that I'm also still like showing up for them in the ways that I can, like with these voice memos, like I really try to make sure that I am still showing up for friends even though I physically can't be there. I write letters and I send them voice memos and like really ask about their lives. And I'm like, if there's one thing that I'm good for now, it is like listening. Like I have all the time and space in the world for you to tell me whatever it is. I want to be that person if you don't have that in your life right now. And like, because I think sometimes when you're not being supported by friends and family, um, you can kind of stop supporting the people around you as well. And I think that that's important to like just try to keep that in mind, that it does obviously still need to be reciprocal in the ways that you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that reminder, Sarah. Somebody in the chat, Brenda, had a question about whether or not you had a template for your, I think it was your letter that goes out to family.
I don't. I thought about I will. I thought about doing that as even just like an email opt-in type of thing. That's like, just here's a template letter you can use and just make it your own and send to your family. Because that is the one drawback. It takes me forever to write them because you really want to make sure you say exactly the right thing. It takes me forever to write anything. And so it takes a long time, and that can really be, it can just be like, I don't have the energy to do this. So thank you for that reminder. I will try to do that and make that a free resource for people, because the more that you can just have stuff that you can give to other people and be like, oh, just read this, the better, I think, for us.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to just open it up to folks to ask any other questions. I know I had a bunch more on my list that, I could ask you for the next 5 hours, but we don't have that kind of time. So I want to make sure anybody that's in the audience gets their opportunity to ask. And if there aren't any others, then I will ask one more of mine. But looks like a couple folks have to leave early, but are saying thank you.
Tammy had a good question in the chat.
Yeah, I'm reading the chats now.
Yeah. What was your question, Tammy? I might have missed it there.
I think I was asking, did you give every single, can you hear me okay?
No.
No.
You're a little soft. I can read it, Tammy. I think I found it. It's Tammy is wanting to know if you have given all the your doctors a copy of your book. Is that the right one?
Yeah. Did I give my No. So this is such a good question. And no, it's something I've really wrestled with because I spiritually and emotionally would really like 100% of my doctors to read this. However, and this is true, people often ask me, if you had a bad experience with a doctor, should you write to them and tell them that they treated you really poorly? And the answer is definitely it depends. It, for me at least, because the absolute reality is that you may need these people for your healthcare team. It's hard to put together a medical team, especially if you have such a poorly understood problem. And so for me, that has been so difficult to find doctors that like take me seriously and that provide good care. So like these doctors, I would definitely not give it to them. Like sometimes they'll be like, hey, I saw you read a book. Should I read it? I'm like, no, definitely not. And it's not that I don't want them to. It's not that I don't want them to like have that, not like in an ideal world, I think it would make them better, but I don't want them to feel attacked and then have some sort of bad feeling about me and then not want to take care of me because their ego is fragile. And my medical care is more important to me than them reading the book. And I have no idea how they're going to respond. They could respond better and my medical care could get better, but they could respond worse and I could lose somebody that took me forever to find. And so I think that however, in terms of like responding to doctors that like treated you poorly, I have written to doctors that it was a really bad experience where I am like certain that I am never going to go back to see them again. And not with like malice or anything, just real feedback that's like, this is totally unacceptable. And, just really laying it out in clear, calm, concise terms. Please do not do this to the patients that come after me. And that I will do, but with the ones where I'm not so sure if I'm going to need them again, which has really happened, I've had to go back and really needed somebody that was horrible to me the first time around, but they were the only person that could do the surgery or the whatever. And so I feel bad about it though, because I'm like, it feels, like I should be able to give it to them, but it's not safe. It's not completely safe. And I really do need my medical care more than I need them to read the book that I wrote. But I do like it when other people feel safe enough to give it to their doctors. I think that that's good because I've heard from so many doctors who are just like, oh my God, like, I can't believe that I was doing that. I feel bad. And I'm sure that there's way more doctors that are like, this crazy lady, she's just, whatever. They think that I'm just the thing that they thought I was before reading the book. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the right answer is.
Yeah, when one person says their doctor recommended it to them, that's wonderful. And then somebody else said, it's not safe, and sometimes we have to choose where to send our energy. And I think that's absolutely true. I think it's really sad that we feel like we can't get the care we need if we speak up sometimes, but that is the reality that we live in. I know I myself have been in that situation, and I know many others have. So
Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but I think things like your book, Sarah, really kind of bring to light these experiences, and even the fact that some doctors are looking at it and reading it and trying to change behavior is really good.
Mhm.
Tammy, I saw you had your hand up. Did you have a quick follow-up? I know we're right at the hour here.
Sorry, can you hear me this time?
That's okay. You're very soft, but if you speak loud, I can try to.
How about that? So it is kind of a follow-up of when you do get individual diagnoses and they're not necessarily related to the specialty of the doctor, but you're uh, uh, you're going back to the doctor for their specialty. I've contemplated this because I've had like a doctor that I had low back pain, and so I was seeing a physiatrist, and a lot of it turned out to be gynecological.
Mhm.
And so I wound up having a hysterectomy and like, oh my God, so much pain went away. Still needed back surgery. But when I went back to her for a different part of my spine now, I'm like, do I tell her about this? Because it could help somebody else. But
In
I
that
didn't
case,
want her to feel attacked.
I would 100% tell that person, because especially I think when it's where I find you really run into trouble is specifically with these contested diagnoses, like with like ME/CFS and POTS and fibromyalgia and things like that. They do not want to hear about that. They just like, they have so many big feelings about those things already that it may exacerbate it. But in this case, it's such a more just like, it's just so much more straightforward of like, hey, just so you know, this is what we figured out, what was going on. And I just wanted to report back on that. I thought you would want to know. I think that could only be well received, but I mean, you never know. I think of that meme where it's like a balloon that has over it says the male ego, and it's like a pin coming towards it. And it's like, and it's just like, I think that's very similar to the doctor's ego. Is just like very, very fragile, even though I don't understand how it got to be that way. They're some of the most celebrated people in the culture. It's hard to understand for me, but I think in your case, you would be well served by sharing that information, because it really did help you. And I think most doctors, I mean, they really do just want to help for the most part, even if they get it wrong. It's just the caveat is like these other diagnoses, they just kind of don't want to help. They hate these diagnoses, and I can't fix that.
Thanks, Sarah. So one more question. It looks like Jade has a question. Let her share that.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for everything. Everything. And I'm trying to think of how I want to ask this to make it like simple. And did you find that when you started reach working with the right kind of doctors for like complex chronic illness, or more helpful doctors who, you know, specialize with Lyme, chronic Lyme, etc., mold, Epstein-Barr, all these things, which is the track that I'm starting to get on. I'm rather early on in all of this, actually. I hope it's okay to ask, did you find that you would work with these kinds of doctors, which like, you know, you're kind of more on the right path for some things, and then like they would give you false hope, and you would have like different feelings about this woe me life, like what it means to be like, can I get well actually? Because we're on the right. Yeah. Like false hope, working with those kind of doctors who do help us. Like, what is that process like? I kind of made that complicated, but
No,
because I
no,
struggle with that.
yeah. If I understand you, please correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I think this is true just kind of in general when you defect from regular medicine over into alternative medicine. It's such a different vibe in terms of like belief. It's like all these people believe you and like want to help, but on the flip side of that, they almost all tend to say, not only do I want to help, I will help. I can help and I can do it and I have the answer. And that is not always true. And so that is often not true. And so I personally, the way that I manage this is like just trying to stay in this like liminal space between like false hope and like false despair. That's like, there's absolutely nothing you can do, and like, just follow me and we're gonna absolutely cure you. It's like, what I try to do is I try to be as informed about it as possible, try to learn about what they're doing as much as possible, and see if that really sounds like if what they're saying really fits with like my actual experience and what they're proposing. Usually I try to make sure that it's pretty grounded in science and like that it has but even like if I'm doing something that's maybe not so grounded in science, I just enter into it saying, I am hoping for the best, but if it doesn't work out, I will be okay. I think where you get into that's partly because I've just been doing this for so long. I think in the beginning, it's so unusual to have a problem that you don't just like do the treatment and you get better. Like that's like just how it is usually. And so to have this problem that's sort of resistant to treatment is really tough. And so that's something that I think is just a process of like kind of coming to terms with like, it's not giving up hope. I think it's very important to maintain hope. It's just maybe not as much hope as like the practitioner who's selling you the whatever, because they have a vested interest in wanting you to keep doing, they're coming back to them and to seeing them. And so it's really tough. It's hard not to become really jaded and cynical, like once you've tried so many things to try to get better. That said, I am pretty jaded and cynical, and I try new stuff regularly because I'm just like, well, maybe it's bullshit, maybe it's not. I can't try everything. I can't constantly be trying new stuff. I don't have the money to constantly be trying new stuff, but I am periodically going to try. I'm going to hope for the best. And if it doesn't work out, I sort of pre-steel myself that like I didn't put all my hopes and dreams into this thing. And also what I used to do is I would tell everyone else around me like, oh, well, don't worry, everyone, I got it. We're doing this thing now. I'm doing acupuncture. She says I'm going to be better in 6 weeks. I mean, 6 months. I mean, 6 years. It just kept getting changed over and over again. And then I developed all this shame around like having told people many times over, like, this is what I'm doing. Don't worry. It definitely will solve the problem. I don't do that. I don't tell anybody else about what I'm trying anymore. Like if they pry it out of me, I'll tell them. But mostly it's just private to me now. And I hope for the best. And if it doesn't work, then I have become kind of accustomed to that and like just try to keep going. And I also don't force myself to like constantly be cure seeking because other people are like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? I'm just like, no, sometimes I just need to just be where I am at and accept where I am at and just make the most of a bad situation where I am at, instead of spending all this time and money and energy trying to get better. But then other times it is time to try again because I want to be better, and that's normal for anybody. So that's how I deal with it. It's not an ideal situation, but yeah.
I think that's such a lovely note to end on, that like we can manage our own expectations, even though others might put pressure on or have expectations for us of what needs to be happening in our bodies. And at the end of the day, we get to decide what are the treatments we want to pursue. Do we want to pursue treatments? Do we want to pursue Western medicine, alternative medicine, and no medicine, and go from there. And that is something that we have some power and control over in this situation. So, um, anyway, well, Sarah, thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful and I think validating for so many. And I wish we had you for 5 more hours, but want to be mindful of everyone's time and energy this evening. So, thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our participants and for your great questions. And yeah, thank you for being a part of another CCI event.
Thank you guys so much. This is such a great community, and I'm so glad that you have each other and that there is some space that you can get some support. So I really appreciate you for having me, and it's nice meeting all of you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Night, everybody.